Oh, sorry, yes. The agenda papers have been updated since they were circulated, so I've got some coverage and
so I'm only here for an hour.
started.
Welcome everybody, thank you very much. Welcome to the Resources Overview and Scrutiny Committee. This meeting will be live webcast or subsequently on the Council's YouTube. And we have had apologies from Council B, Councillor Henry Quillen, Councillor Ken Wood, and Councillor Rashad Mahmood. Members are reminded that they must declare all relevant pecuniary and non-pecuniary interests arising from any business to be discussed at this meeting. If a disclosure of pecuniary interest is declared, a member must not speak or take part in that agenda item. Any declarations will be recorded in the minutes of the meeting. Item 4, action notes and action tracker. There are 2 outstanding actions from the last meeting, and these have been changed. The notes on the action trackers notes. Is it agreed? Great. Agreed. Thank you.
The notes for the last meeting.
Notes of the last meeting. Agreed. Thank you. Item 5. Yes.
Just for anybody who's joining online, just to say that the reports that were on CMIS were updated today, so a copy of the up-to-date papers have been circulated at the meeting. But for anybody online, if you download the reports previously, please go on to CMIS and make sure that you've got the up-to-date reports that were uploaded today. Thank you.
Thank you, Fiona. Item 5, Cabinet Member for Finance and Resources. We have Councillor Yvonne Mosquito with us here, who's a Cabinet Member for Finance and Resources. She's in attendance today. Welcome, Councillor Mosquito.
Thank you very much, Chair, and also congratulations on your new appointment as Chair of the Overview and Scrutiny Committee. And I hope that you are kind to me in my new role. I'm very shy and nervous, particularly as I have Councillor Miriam Jenkins here, and I've been trying to read all my papers to see if I can keep up with him and Councillor Tilsley, and of course yourself, Chair. But I am very nervous and very shy in this new role that I have, and I hope that my thank you,
Right.
Chair.
So,
I want to inject a little bit of humour in finance, because I think finance is a really incredible, a very portfolio.
It's not a laughing matter.
It's we can laugh about some of the things sometimes.
Right.
Well, I'm trying my best to make it as, because some people say it's very dry, but it isn't. Chair, would you like me to go to my presentation?
yes, it is.
Well, I'm hoping that my term will be punctuated or highlighted by making finance as inclusive as possible, creating more financial literacy for members, because I remember becoming a councillor and having no idea about finances. And then we had a very good, an excellent finance officer at the time, Sarah Wood, that made it more understandable for me. Do you remember Sarah Wood? Yes, you do. She was. So we now have an absolutely excellent team of officers who have been, I mean, I've got to say I'm incredibly impressed. And before I took up this role, I was a little bit critical, but having seen what they've achieved in such a short period of time, I am very pleased and proud to be in this particular role. So I want to create a better understanding of finances for all of our councillors as well as citizens. And what I've done, we've created a number of priorities, which is the first one, as you can see, is to ensure the financial resilience of the council, to ensure that we can deliver services for Birmingham citizens. And that's just, again, making sure that we've got our proper, strong, healthy reserves, that we're making sure we monitor what each department's doing. And so it's, and trying to use this very simple language. What do we have to spend? So we know we've got a £3.8 billion budget. Who's spending it? Why are they spending it? Are they spending it properly? And the departments are doing well, the departments are not doing so well. So I'm trying to make this as easy as possible. And of course, we need to look at things like borrowing. They call it prudential borrowing, but borrowing, and are we doing it right? Those are very basic things. So, and we, as you know, we do have very healthy reserves. Our spend is under control because we have a remarkably strong and talented team around us in the city. And as I say, I am very impressed. And number two, I put it at number two, use the power of our procurement spend to increase the social value, secure more contracts, especially focused on local employment, easing the cost of living crisis, tackling inequality, supporting community organisations and social enterprises. And for a long time, I've complained about the fact that we are not engaging local businesses. We tend to contract from outside of the city. They may get a nice Birmingham postcode, but most of these contractors are from out of our city. We need to grow our own. We need to try and be as inclusive as possible. I call it supply development, and we are working on that. And a lot of work has gone on previously with the previous chair around the procurement rules, and it's been changed now and again. I'm very pleased with the way that has developed. So this strategy that we've adopted will be more inclusive. We're trying to get a lot more local suppliers in, and a lot of work has been going on and continues to go on around that. We've got to ensure that we pay our suppliers on time. As you know, a lot of our small businesses cannot take a hit of not being paid £50,000, £100,000 because they haven't got those reserves. So we'll be making sure that we monitor the way that we pay our small and minority ethnic businesses. Build on our, I think that's self-explanatory, build on our effective relationship with Birmingham Chamber of Commerce and the Federation of Small Businesses to enhance the opportunities for our small businesses and helping them to win tender opportunities. And then embed the principles of everyone's battle, everyone's business. That's the new term of our equality agenda. Everybody's battle, everybody's business into our commissioning and procurement strategies. Again, it's about trying to be as inclusive as possible and making in my view, our procurement a lot less simpler, so we can create opportunities for local people and local business. Small and medium. Small and medium. I want you to tell me. I don't mind. Small and medium. What is it? Enterprises. What does I put it? Small and medium ethnic minorities or something. I don't mind being corrected. I've got a problem. Let's have a look. Continue to promote Birmingham Business Charter and social responsibility. I do have a particular gripe about this to drive economic and environmental and social benefits for Birmingham business and citizens. We have very large developments coming into Birmingham, and I don't think that the social value contract that we get from some of them is particularly good. I did go to the launch of the Mercian. It was a project on the Broad Street, and they hit all of their targets. They've got lots of young people working there, locals, but everything was just a wonderful initiative to see. But we don't see that. And I can talk about my ward where we've developed very large initiatives, and they've only given, contractors are making sort of 85 million minimum profit, and they give us £250,000 towards our Section 106 or community infrastructure. That is, in my view, a little bit Yes, thank you. Yes, so I'd like to see if we can address that in a nice way. So and again, we have a city with a very large, diverse business base, and this is not reflected in our commissioning. Number 6, which is continue to promote. Oh yes, I've done that. Promote fair tax accreditation to encourage companies to pay their fair share. Now, this is one that we can't force them to do anything. We can encourage them, but we can't deny contracts to those companies that say, well, tax evasion is illegal, but tax avoidance isn't. So, but it's a good declaration to have. So we have a declaration that a number of companies have signed up to. It's a declaration for fair tax. Build on the City Council's growing reputation for excellence in financial management by supporting information of SIPFA. Now, again, that's something that I know I'm inheriting because we have such a strong team. And I know that we've currently got a 3-star rating, but we are moving to a 4-star rating. Very pleased about that. In relation to and I think I've mentioned the procurement rules, where we've already thanked the previous Chair, Councillor Acklat, for all of his work and his committee for the work on the procurement. Although they tried on a bit in the council meeting, didn't you, Councillor Jenkins, when you weren't happy with the recommendations of the entire, but I respected that. And I think some of the points that you raised in the council meetings were justified, but at least it was a discussion you had amongst everyone and members came to a conclusion. And then I also have a responsibility of overseeing the commercial activities. And we have a number of commercial entities, and we just have to ensure, and I'm sure Councillor Jenkins will agree with this one, that they are operating on a commercial basis. So I know that Sarah Pitt has that responsibility, and I shall be monitoring that with interest. And I think that's all I have to say, Chair.
Thank you very much, Councillor Mosquito. Before I open it to the members for any questions, I have a question, Councillor Mosquito. You said here, by supporting the implementation of SIPFA recommendations to achieve 4-star status, what do you have? What kind of recommendations have we had to get them on to the 4 stars?
Okay. Do you want to answer that, Lisa? Yeah.
Yeah, happy to. Thank you, Councillor Mosquito. Thank you, Chair. So I'm Lisa Taylor. I'm the Interim Head of Financial Planning. I'm here for Sarah Pitt today. So where we are at the moment, Councillor, is we've been awarded a 3-star award from SIPFA for financial management across the council. That's a massive improvement from the 1-star rating back in 2019. That 3-star rating was awarded in 2021. It is a 5-star model, so we are now working to achieve a 4-star rating. So that shows that the council is on a journey to improve its financial management even further than it already has. So to do that, we need to continue to demonstrate to SIPFA, who is the accounting body, the Chartered Institute of Public Finance and Accountancy, that the council across the piece has good financial management controls in place, and we're continuing to work towards that 4-star goal.
Thank you for that, Lisa. Any further questions? I'll be up to Councillor Jenkins.
Yes, a few things worth mentioning. Obviously, to move to the 3-star status is good. I mean, when I first joined the council, our nominal ledger didn't add up. I came into this council imagining that an organisation like Birmingham City Council would be an exemplar for accounting standards. And in my very first audit committee, I discovered that our accounts didn't even balance. Now, we've come a long way from that, and obviously a 3-star rating is okay, but I think we have to remember that, the citizens of Birmingham, noting that we are the largest metropolitan authority in Europe, are entitled to expect a very high standard of accounting. we should at the very least be 3-star. We probably ought to be 4 or 5-star. So whilst I do congratulate the new group of finance officers who brought us to this, well done. I think we're entitled to expect that we should be there. We're probably entitled to expect a little bit more, given the amount of taxpayers' money that we have at our disposal and the scale of the organisation. I would be careful about the use of Section 106. I'm not sure. Is Section 106 still apply? Or is it now? Is it now still? It's still. Yeah, I think it's been replaced by the community infrastructure level, but it's the same point. But what we've got to bear in mind is that the state is the only organisation that can give planning permission. And what we've got to be careful of is that we don't start selling planning permission. We don't start exploiting that position for commercial gain. And what's really happening here is that we are allowing people to build, put buildings up to improve our environment, but we're making them pay for the privilege. But they already pay for that privilege through taxes in all sorts of different ways. We've got the highest taxes in 70 years. You've got to be careful that we don't burden the private sector with more costs. And bearing in mind that the state spends money very inefficiently, the private sector spends it very efficiently. So the less money that the state collects in tax, and the more that remains in the private sector, the more productive will the economy be. So whilst when somebody puts a building up, we may ask them to do certain things as part of the process. We've got to be careful that we don't take that too far. One, to discourage people from doing building at all, and two, to simply move resources from the private sector to the public sector, where they will be deployed far less efficiently than would otherwise be the case. Yes, on the procurement exercise that we did, there was a minority opinion from the Conservatives. We felt that there were a number of things wrong about the report, and there's a lot of it that we agreed with, but the thing that troubled us mainly was the level of officer delegation, that we allow officers a degree of procurement delegation far in excess of any other core city. We feel that has acted to the detriment of the taxpayers of Birmingham over the years. And that was one of the main things. There was others. And finally, I was interested in this point about promote fair tax accreditation, because there seems to be two things in that sentence. Promote fair tax accreditation, and bear in mind that nobody is under an obligation to arrange their affairs so as to pay the maximum possible amount of tax. It's entirely legitimate within the rules to arrange your affairs just to minimise your tax liability. And that's the socially responsible thing to do, because the more money we keep in the private sector, the more productive will be the economy. So it says here, we're going to promote fair tax accreditation. So that's just companies operating within the law, which we all understand we have to, even if the law needs changing. But then he goes on to say, we'll promote businesses contracted by the council that are matching pay parity with local government, which seems to be a separate subject. Are we suggesting that in order that it would be a tendering advantage for a business if they were paying their staff at the same rates that local government pays its staff? Try to read that correctly. Is that what it's saying?
Is it the living wage? I think it's the living wage.
Well, no, it says matching pay parity. Now, people in the public sector are very well paid compared to the private sector now, when you factor all aspects, the pension, the job security, and all that sort of thing. Yeah. So are we saying that if a private sector company pays in line with local government, they would have a tendering advantage over a firm that didn't? Have I read that correctly in terms of what that's saying?
It seems that way, but I can always get clarity.
Probably Steve Sandicott might be.
Oh, so Steve,
yeah. Maybe during the meeting to check.
Oh, yeah, we can get
Steve to answer that.
That's a good point. It's a good point.
I haven't seen that in any contracts that I've been involved in. I think what we do see is that maybe because we talk about, we try to give you a living wage, so that might be one of the criteria procurement. Confirm that they do pay that.
Yeah, so there's three things. There's the statutory minimum wage, you have to pay that.
Yeah.
There's this living wage, which is a higher one. But this isn't saying that. This is saying pay parity with local government. It's suggesting that you'd have to match the local government pay scales, whatever they happen to be.
We'll check that with.
We'll wait for clarification.
But okay. Maybe just slightly looser wording. It should be. You may refer to that.
But it may also be that we can't match the private sector because they're paid so much in certain areas, aren't they? Some of them are highly paid. Some.
Yeah, but they earn it. That's the difference.
Yeah, which is nothing wrong with that. So you're right about getting clarity on pay parity, because we may not be able to pay certain officers the kind of scales that they would be paid in the private sector. So yes,
So let's clarify that. That was it, Chair.
Thank you for that, Councillor Jenkins. Thank you.
And could you answer that question?
Yeah, on the 3-star,
Yeah.
you are right. The system of Birmingham is a 4-star, 5-star financial management. There is something about the complexity of Birmingham that is due to its size. I started off as a trainee here 25 years ago. Reminiscing was this week.
Well,
I was walking through the council last 25 years ago.
25.
And then, but I worked in 3 London boroughs in between that, up until to the FD level. And there is, we're about 4 times the size of a London borough. There is some complexity that does come with our size, which does provide its own challenges. But we do have the resources. We should be working through that. But simply, it's not just the 3 stars. Not just about accounting. It's about financial management and about culture as well. So when I think we brought it to audit committee a year ago, where they gave the metrics about 18 or 19. So on, for example, treasury management, they thought we were exemplary. We've got the debt report later on the agenda. We'll talk about that. But it's about not just in finance, but in budget holders having that culture of budget management, but also with members as well. How up to date are members with financial knowledge, which is why we have that training, which is why Councillor Mosquito is one of the key things about increasing member awareness and knowledge of budget literacy of members. So it gets to reach that. I don't think there's any authority that is 5-star at the moment. I think there may be 1 or 2 4-star, but I'm not sure with the ultra. But
I mean, we shouldn't be obsessed with the number of stars.
No, it's not.
Because it's only part, sometimes you can find a 4-star hotel that's a heck of a lot better than something which is nominally a 5-star hotel. So star is only a part of the picture, and we shouldn't be obsessed with it. All I'm making the point is, whilst we should be we shouldn't be over-congratulating ourselves because we ought to have been there in the first place. But nevertheless, we can't pause for a moment and say, well done, I haven't got to where we should have been, but now we need to move on.
So thank you very much, Chair. Yes, we should be a 3-star, but the fact that we were 1-star and the current team have brought us to a 3-star, which I believe is an incredible achievement for somewhere the size of Birmingham. We are the largest local authority in Europe. There are a complexity of all sorts of issues that they've somehow managed to galvanise together to get us to 3-star. So before, I remember a particular council saying, what do you know about finances? And I said, well, I was a commissioner for the Legal Service Commission, which distributed the director in the entire country, non-exec director of the Birmingham Health Authority or Strategic Health Authority, policing governance as well, and some international responsibilities. And what I've seen in terms of Birmingham's achievements, I have been impressed. So I'm glad that you said, let's pause and say, well done. But it is still an achievement and it's a lot of work. Remember, it's a smaller team now. When I became a councillor, I think we had 44,000 members of staff, 1996. Now it's down to how many? Is it 9,000 that we've got?
No.
So there's 9.5. So we've got less staff doing a lot more. And to achieve what they've achieved, I'm still saying it's not good enough. We wanted to be at a 4-star. We've got to say, well done. And I like to give people their accolades once they're alive, not when they're dead. So I agree with everything you said, but I would have a different slant. I'd say half full rather than half empty. And thank you. I look at my councillor colleague and I'm conscious of the Queen's position now. We have lost our parents. A number of councillors lost our parents. And I keep saying to people, say the good things whilst we have the opportunity of saying it, whilst they're alive. And I want the officers to know that we are exceptionally proud of their achievement. So,
thank you, Councillor Mosquito. Thank you, Councillor Jenkins. Councillor Tilsley,
Yeah, there are just the odd 1 or 2 comments that I've made. First of all, as far as the SIGFA rating is concerned, when I was deputy leader and took over, we were a 1-star authority as far as CPA is concerned. And due to my gentle administrations with officers and members, we got to a 3-star, which was no mean feat.
that was after 4 as well.
And we were verging on it. And I distinctly remember the former chief executive, Sir Michael Lyons, telling me in a very patronising voice, Paul, you will never take Birmingham to more than a 2-star because of its complexity. So when we achieved 3-star, I made sure that we had contact because it took an awful lot of commitment from members and officers to drive it through. And, you know, I pay tribute to the fact that we are now a 3-star authority, coming from where we were, which was pretty chaotic. And I think you've got to recognise that.
Yes.
Because if you don't recognise where you are, you're never, ever going to make any improvements. And I always grew up, and, you know, bear in mind, you've done 25 years, you know, 25 plus another 25. I always thought that Birmingham were, as far as senior officers were concerned, the bee's knees. It was only when I took on regional responsibility that I found out that there were some bee's knees outside Birmingham as well. So that was a bit of a cold shock to me. The comment that you've made and Councillor Jenkins has made about SIL, I do have concerns about it. I don't think that it's kept in line with the 106 commitments that we had. It has diluted. And what is worse, as far as I'm concerned, it has diluted them as far as wards are concerned, because the SIL money is going into a pot. It's not going to the wards that are having to suffer on a large development. And, you know, I had to live with 200 properties being developed in Shelder, and that created absolute mayhem for the local community for 2 years. And there was no recognition because of SIL included in that. So I think we have to recognise that. Now, in your first bullet point, supporting community organisation and social enterprises, entirely agree. I worked in the voluntary sector for 25 years, so I know the challenges that there are with the voluntary sector. And the voluntary sector can reach quartiles within our community that we never can. And I'm thinking now very much along the lines of the challenges that we have of the energy commitments that households are going to be burdened with. Okay, there's been an announcement there's going to be an average cap of 2.5 grand. You know, break it down, that's 50 quid a week. It was 20 quid a week. So we've more than doubled it in 12 months. And that for many families is going to be an enormous burden. It is going to be heat or eat. And I am particularly concerned about children going to school in the morning without anything in the stomachs. Now, I think we can help through the voluntary sector particularly, in helping families to be more adventurous with their cooking regimes. And I went into Asda's today. I'm giving them an advert for nothing. You can buy a slow cooker in Asda's for 16 quid. You know, that is going to cost you to feed a family a quarter of the amount that is going to cost to stick a meal in another. And I think we need to be entrepreneurial and work with the voluntary sector. And maybe that is creating monies that we ain't got, or we don't know we've got, or we can create efficiencies to help the voluntary sector reach the hardest in our community, to help them meet the challenge. And then on procurement, as I said, I worked in the voluntary sector for a few years. One of the problems with the voluntary sector is when they want to compete for procurement contracts with the larger companies, they just ain't got the resources. And you sit down in front of a bid that you've got to fill in as a small organisation. Councillor Jenkins knows, because he's been there.
Doing it.
Yeah, doing it day in and day out. I used to do it day in and day out. And the complexity of it just drives you insane, because you haven't got that specialist knowledge within a 5-man team or a 10-man team. And this is my concern, that we should make it as easy as possible. Now, I'm going to talk about European funding, which I know that Councillor Jenkins will probably cross himself and touch the goal. But we developed, particularly for European Social Fund, a simple A4 application form. And this was done through Brussels, particularly for local organisations. And it put them on the right track. And if they didn't meet the criteria, it was a pointless exercise in them wasting their time. But it helped them. And I think that we need to do more or less the same with procurement, to try and make it as simple as possible, particularly for some of the smaller contracts. I'm not talking about the 100,000s or the quarter millions, but the smaller contracts that would do so much to help local enterprises, SMEs within Birmingham. And let's face it, if you take now, when I grew up, it was done like Lucas, Ansell's, IMI. You go around, and Birmingham was dominated by large employers. It ain't the same anymore. Once you've taken out the health service and local government, and now the academies, largely we depended on SMEs. They are the lifeblood of Birmingham, and we need to do as much as possible to help them engage with our whole procurement policy. And with that, I'll shut up. Thank you.
Thank you, Councillor Tilsley. Just for the record, I think Councillor Tilsley makes some valid points, Councillor Mosquito, especially with the exercise of procurement, making the whole process easy. These are common complaints that you do get. People, need direction, and the whole process needs to be simplified. So,
Yes.
thank you for that.
Chair, if I can just add, from experience, not only from doing it myself, but from many people and businesses I've spoken to in politics over the years, one of the things that we have to be careful of is over caution on the part of officers, in the sense that, I mean, yes, they will produce a big tender document, which is burdensome when you're a small business, because you have to take out time out from delivering to write a response. But the tender document will build questions in that seek to minimise the risk for the purchaser. So it'll say, how many tens of millions on your balance sheet? How many hundred employees do you have? Do you subscribe to this? Do you subscribe to this? So you kind of, disadvantaging the smaller tenderer straight away, because they can't meet those things. And it may be on occasions that we look at the tender and say, actually, we can afford to carry a little bit extra risk associated with a smaller supplier, because often the smaller supplier may be cheaper, they may be more agile. So there could be benefits associated with that slight increase of risk, that we're dealing with a smaller and therefore slightly more vulnerable business. But in certain circumstances, if the supplier were to fail or had to be replaced, it wouldn't be the end of the world anyway. Sometimes it would, and you'd have to, put a bigger weighting on the risk factor. And then also, look at, a lot of people in purchasing want to do everything on a spreadsheet. They actually believe you can set a tender, wait and score every response, and the number at the bottom tells you the answer. But of course, what that completely removes from the process is the human interaction part, that people buy from people. And then very often in life, probably most of the time, we make our decisions about what to buy based on subjective rather than objective factors. So we should make allowance, not just for people's responses and scores on a spreadsheet, but how we feel about the person that we're buying from. Sometimes the smaller companies can give a much more personal experience than can a large. Small company, you're often talking to the managing director. When Birmingham City Council rings, they speak to the managing director. He reacts immediately. It's a big contract. In a huge business, you're probably speaking to someone part way up the chain who isn't in a position to react like that. So all I'm saying really is, I'm agreeing entirely with what Paul said, but just think about procurement in the round, not just in perhaps the way that procurement officers traditionally have taken it in large organisations.
Yeah.
Councillor Jenkins, I'm sure Councillor Mosquito, I see her rapidly taking notes down, so these points have been noted. Thank you for that, members. Moving on swiftly.
So do you want me to respond?
No. You can respond.
I can very quickly. I've got some suggestions that we can possibly stand up to a future meeting to discuss some of these things. But in terms of the tips for people who are in crisis, Councillor Tilsley, I think we should be doing that as a council to help people. Just even though it may be about a slow cooker, it could be about turning the lights off at a particular time. It could be anything. We need to be helping people who are struggling now. So the cost of living crisis is a true emergency. And I saw it during the campaign, and I saw a woman trying to burn a wood burner in a flat in my ward, and I was horrified. But in terms of the work with the voluntary sector, I absolutely agree with you, because I was involved in the voluntary sector as well, that they can actually reach people that we as a council can't. The STIL monies, I was told that STIL and Section 106, Section 106 and STIL was the same. And then I was told recently, we've still got some Section 106 monies, and we do have the community infrastructure levy money as well. But yes, we need to be more coordinated, and the leader has said on a number of occasions, and I know it's happening, that we need to have a policy in terms of how that money is spent. And we do need to align that money with some of the wards where it's come from. And I can tell you that certainly being a ward councillor, I didn't know about them. I mean, I've been asking for years about Section 106 monies in my ward, deeper with all those developments, and still couldn't get an answer. But now on the other side, I'm now seeing this. I'm learning, and we will do something about it. We will try to ensure that that money is aligned to the issues that we as local councillors in our wards feel is important, and it's not been happening. I don't want to use the word slush fund. I don't think that's appropriate, but we're not going to have one of those. We've got to do something. We've got to be a bit more coordinated, and the leaders actually said this as well. In terms of the capacity of the smaller organisations, the small, medium, and enterprise businesses, yes, Miriam, it is harder for a small company to be able to go through our procurement process because it is so bureaucratic. I remember a friend of mine trying to buy a house, and they were struggling with the house because they couldn't find, I don't know, it was the leaseholder. So the solicitor said, could you get some indemnities? I don't see why we can't use indemnities for those risks as well. So if something goes wrong, you have an indemnity which covers the potential of our losses. Because all that the council seems to be concerned with, you talk about caution, it's risk. We've always been afraid that we might lose out in some way. And I think that could help to mitigate by having some sort of indemnities in place. But I will say to you, I'm a very humble individual. I do like what you said, and I'm going to try to incorporate the SIL, Section 106, in my priorities. I'm going to try to incorporate, I mean, it's here already, but make it a bit more explicit about working with our small and medium enterprises to ensure that we try and make it less bureaucratic. Because I went to a SIPS meeting, and I think it's SIPS is CIP, it's nothing to do with procurement, it's professional. Yes, and I met someone from Severn Trent, and they have reduced down the bureaucracy around procurement, and they've been able to engage local people. And I thought, that sounds really good. But it was fairly early in my time when I became Finance and Resource Cabinet member. And I'm still trying to absorb quite a lot of information. So is it okay I'll do that, Lisa? Can I do that? Can I say I'm going to incorporate some of the comments in my priorities? Thank you very much.
Yep.
So I shall do that. And so I thank you so very much for your honesty and your kindness and sensitivity and softness with me. Yes, you put out the violin. Yes, you do that. Thank you so much.
If I can interject, Councillor, the Section 106 monies for ward allocation, I've heard on the grapevine that certain wards who were allocated Section 106 money, that money was transferred to other wards. Now, I don't know how true that is. Could we have some kind of clarification on that?
Lisa's put her hand up.
Yes, Lisa.
Thank you, Chair. So Section 106 and seal monies, when they come into the organisation, do have criteria attached to them, and we must adhere to that criteria. So the only way you can change and reallocate monies from one criteria to another is to get the agreement of the developer who actually paid the money to the council in the first place. What I would say to you is we are actually doing a thorough review at the moment of seal and Section 106 as part of the budget setting process that we are undertaking at the moment to make sure that we are using those monies that are there in the best way possible, and that we're using them in the timely manner that they must be used in as well. So we are undertaking a thorough review at the moment.
Okay, so what you're saying is that once the 106 monies are allocated, they can't be transferred to another ward? Is that what you're saying?
So when a developer pays the money to the council, so if a developer has a Section 106 agreement with the council, there will be some criteria. So for example, it might say, and I'm making this up, the developer will pay £100 for a children's playground in X park. Now, that's what the money needs to go towards. If the council wants to do something different, they have to go back to the developer, get their agreement to move that money, say, from the playground in the specific park to a playground in a different park, or actually to do something different with that money. So we can't do that without getting the developer's agreement to that.
Has that been done before?
Has it been done before?
Yeah,
I don't know. I don't have the history of Birmingham, I'm afraid. We would need to take that away.
Yeah, we want to hold on to this point. I want to bring Councillor Tilsley in.
In the past, if a developer has taken over a piece of public open space, the 106 agreement will say words to the effect that it must be spent on leisure activities and improvements. It doesn't necessarily say that it's going to be in Sheldon Ward. They can take a wider area, a wider community, and that is how monies have been unfortunately moved around, which has always concerned me. And I have seen it happen in the past. It hasn't happened in Sheldon, of course. I've kicked up stink when anybody suggested it. But I know,
which is what I'm doing now.
But I know that it has happened. But 106 really now has gone, and it is all sealed community improvement. Yeah, and that is in a greater city part for the city to allocate, and therefore it is very much more difficult to hold on to monies that have been derived from SIL to a specific local area or a ward.
And the reason why I pick up on this, Lisa, is because we had a case where a ward was allocated Section 106 monies, and it was a substantial amount. And then they got a subsequent email saying that, well, that amount has been drastically reduced because it's been moved to another ward. Now, the original ward that was allocated to, the elected representatives of that ward were quite miffed, saying, you know, why is it that this has happened? So I know you're suggesting there's a report. We would like to see that report, Lisa, and Councillor Mosquito, you know, if you can take a note on that, because this is a recurring issue here with a lot of the members, a lot of the colleagues. So I think the way we're going to move forward is, I think it sounds like a very good plan when we put it into a pot and then allocate it. But who decides where and how it's allocated? I'm sure we'll get some clarification.
Lisa,
Lisa, yeah.
Yeah, can I suggest, Chair, that we get somebody from the planning department who really understands SIL and Section 106 and how they do allocate the monies to come and speak to this committee at some point. So we look at it from a finance point of view, but we don't have the understanding of how the agreements have been written in the first place. So I think rather than us guessing, and as I say, I don't have the history of what's happened previously, why don't you put onto your work plan that someone comes back and talks to you about it?
The finance is one element of it. The main element is it's a legally binding agreement between us and the developer. And there may be a lesson here about how we draft those. Do we keep them open-ended to leisure activities, or do you want to be specific?
Exactly.
There may be a role for board members and
and there's also time limits as well. You've got to do it within 5 years. Otherwise, the money reverts to the developer.
If the chair could provide the example of that particular incident you're talking about, then Lisa and myself can forward that to the relevant team.
And I think, as I say, planning can actually answer some questions, but I think the critical point is the drafting of those agreements.
Yeah.
Do we need it open-ended, or do we make it specific? And I think that's where we've come up with the past. But there's been a lot of, I know that the leader is definitely committed to having a strategy and policy around how we use that. So I look forward to seeing that.
Just on the section, I think the statutory responsibility scrutiny don't cover scrutinising planning decisions. So I think I might get some advice on, because I think the questions being asked here, are right in terms of how the money's spent, but just in terms of scrutiny's relationship with planning. I'm sure officers for planning could come, but I just want to be really clear about that scrutiny doesn't scrutinise planning decisions. But I think what I'm understanding is that it would be helpful to understand the policy on which those decisions are based.
What's happened to Section 106?
Exactly. So it's not about scrutinising individual decisions, whether it's right or wrong. The policy.
It's the policy. The policy. Do we, when we're getting these monies, on what basis are we getting it? Is it open-ended? So that means the smaller wards, or the wards with less influential councillors, may not get anything at all and even know about the money that's been spent in their wards. What is the process? And we're still very unclear about it. And this is something that's been constant throughout the whole of certainly my time as a councillor, and certainly, well, you've been around a bit longer than me, haven't you? So I couldn't get some clarity, and I'd like to get clarity. But my commitment, Chair, is for financial inclusion, literacy. Is it understandable a word? Making finance more understandable.
Yeah.
Is that a word? Yeah, I like that one.
Yeah.
So making finance more understandable, easier for us to absorb.
Comprehensive.
And because in the past we have made some decisions based upon politics rather than practical financial issues that we as a council have to face. And we saw that in some very high-profile cases, which I would like us as councillors not to get into again without saying too much.
Thank you for that. Councillor Mosquito. I'd like to, could we, Lisa, invite some of the officers from planning, or somebody from planning, to explain to us what the policy and the process is for the Section 106 money?
We'll pick up with the chair.
Okay. Moving on to financial monitoring report number 4, 2022/23. Lisa?
Yeah, thank you, Chair. I've got a couple of slides that I'd like to share with the committee, if I may, please. Fiona, are you sharing the slides?
It's just open.
Okay. So while the slides are coming up, I'll just give you a little bit of background. So this is the 4th month financial monitoring coming to Resources and Overview Scrutiny Committee for you to understand and hear where we are at with the financial monitoring. So if I can have the next slide, please. So so Sarah Pitt brought to you last month, Q1, which also was presented to Cabinet. This is month 4, and I'll just give you a reminder of the national picture where we are on the financial challenges that Birmingham City Council are facing, and this list is by no means the complete list, and it's changing all the time at the moment, but you'll all be aware of rising inflation. We've still got the ongoing war in Ukraine and the economic shock from that. We're still recovering from the pandemic, and we're still having the impacts of the Brexit. So there's lots of things impacting on us, giving us financial challenges. What I'd like to say is we have seen councils failing across the country due to poor governance, bad decision making, weak procurement, low levels of reserves and over borrowing, and you'll hear a bit more about debt at the next item as well. We've already discussed this afternoon how Birmingham is in a strong, robust financial position. We're a 3-star SIT for Financial Management Authority. We do have strong reserves and balances. And we do have plans to reduce our levels of borrowing. We do obviously need to do all of that in the round and make sure that we make the right and safe decisions as we do that. We're focusing on value for money and transforming, so we want to make sure that we get the best value out of the money we do have available to spend. We transform our services, and then we make sure we deliver the best-in-class services for the citizens of Birmingham. As you'll be aware, we have a rolling approach in place to the budget setting. So we don't just set the budget once a year, we continue to review the budget all year. And then there's a report coming to October Cabinet around the refresh of the medium-term financial strategy. So we're identifying our risks all year round and making sure that we're able to take action really early on those. Having said all that, we still do have financial challenges, and when we set the budget back in February, we had a gap of 33 million in future years, and that's where we are at the moment. We're working to close that gap. That's why Sarah isn't here today with you, because she's actually with CLT working on how they will close that budget gap for the future. Next slide, please. So month 4, as I say, we're still aiming to have a balanced budget, a balanced revenue budget by the end of the financial year. As you'll see from the report on the agenda, this is a high-level report. It's got a review of the risks and the mitigating factors. We will keep those under review and keep developing those. The capital programme, you can see from the report, there is a risk to delivery, but that's a risk around under delivery. And what I'd like to say is if we aren't able to deliver in the time available, we do not lose the funding. We just slip that money to the following year. So quite often with capital programmes, they're very big schemes. There is slippage in them. We slip the programme, the money follows. So the money is not lost. At the moment, there's no major issues identified in the housing revenue account or the dedicated schools grant or around our treasury management. So we're in a good position with all of those. One of the things we have assumed this year is where we get grant monies to support activities and support services, we will spend up until those grant monies. We will not spend further money on those activities. So they need to live within their financial envelope. And we are obviously continuing to really closely review interest rates, and you'll hear a little bit more about debt in the next item as well. Next slide, please. So having said all of that, there are risks, as you'll be aware, that the council are facing, and here's a few of them that we are working to mitigate at the moment. So in children's and families, we've got special education needs, we've got home to school transport, and within the Birmingham Children's Trust, we've got rising placement costs. Within adult social care, we're continuing to see demand increasing, inflation costs increasing, potential shortfalls in client contributions as they can't afford to pay for some of the services they may have had. And we're still working through the fair cost of care, the national scheme. In city operations, like many other councils across the country, parking income has fallen as a result of the pandemic and hasn't risen to the same levels as pre-pandemic yet. So we're having to review our parking services to make sure that they remain sustainable for the future. Similar with leisure management, while fees are starting to recover, they haven't fully recovered yet. And new to city operations for this year in particular are inflationary pressures around electricity and fuel. They are rising above what we've got in the budget at the moment. Housing, increasing demand from our citizens as they're being impacted by the economic crisis. They are having a call on us for more housing services, so there's more demand for us. So that's risks in services we deliver. We've also got risks to money budgets that we've set. So the pay award, the national pay award, which is still being negotiated at the current offer of £1,925 per employee, that will put a £14 million pressure on the council's general fund above what we estimated at the start of the financial year. We estimated a 2.5% increase. We will fund that from the Financial Resilience Reserve, but it is a pressure to the council. As I've already said, the inflationary pressures, cost, energy, contract costs rising, all putting pressure on the council. One of the other things we're still looking at as a risk is we have a number of savings in the budget for this year, which spread across a number of different directorates. Some of those still need to be distributed, so there is a risk to the delivery of some of those. And as I've mentioned already, in adult social care, income collection, due to the current economic crisis and the impact on citizens and businesses, we are seeing, and we'll potentially may see further, we don't know yet, people struggling to pay monies that they owe to the council. And then just last slide, please, if I may. So what are we doing to try and mitigate all of these risks to us? So if you remember last year, we put in place some spend controls, three panels around workforce, facilities management and procurement. We've increased the rigour on those spend controls. They did deliver savings last year, and we've increased the rigour again to make sure that we continue to look at all of our spend. I've already mentioned an ongoing review of reserves. Section 106 and SIL fall into that category, so we're having a look at those. We do have a policy contingency budget, which has already been set aside for some electricity pressures, so there's a mitigating factor there. We have a financial resilience reserve to fund and pay for inflation. The thing I would say about any reserve is it's one-off unless you continue to replenish it, so we need to make sure we use those reserves wisely. We are speeding up the transformation programme, so if we can go quicker and we can go faster and drive out savings, we will do. We're also using benchmarking, so we're looking at both local other authorities to Birmingham, but also wider national authorities to identify if there's things they're doing that we could follow, which are driving efficiencies. So we're looking at that. And then the last thing I'll say is we're seeking opportunities to deliver future years savings that are built in the budget earlier. So can we drive those savings quicker? So just to sum up, what you can see at month 4, and you can see from the report in your pack today, there are pressures on the council's budget. We're working on them. And at the moment, as I said right at the very start, the strategic aim is to balance the budget by the end of the financial year. Thank you, Chair, and I'm happy to take any questions.
Thank you for that, Lisa. I'll open it up to the members for any questions and comments. Councillor Chilton.
Thank you. I take it that we're taking the month 4 monitoring report in with the report.
Yes.
Yes. Just a nod would be sufficient.
So I can't actually see the room. I've just got a black screen at the moment.
Right. I've read it through. I'll start with 2.1, which is capital. And I think the point is made that the capital spend is always weighted towards the end of the year. Hence, we've got a budget of £531 million, and the slippage is going to be, last year it was 162. I am always reminded of the first Prime Minister of India, Pandit Nehru, and he was very, very concerned about the results from the cricket team. And he had the captain of the cricket team in to have a little chat. And he said, why is it that we keep on having draws and not winning matches? And the captain said, it's because of the second innings. We always get a good score in the second innings. And his response was, well, why can't we have the second innings first? Now, I'm taking that as far as the capital is concerned, because we're weighting it towards the second half of the financial year. If we profile it more to the first half of the financial year, we're benefiting from the good weather, because the second half of the the financial year is usually winter and spring when the ground is drying out, if we're doing building work. So it's just a little aside, really. I think we need to look at the capital programme and start to profile it more in keeping with what we know we can achieve, instead of continually having slippages in the second half. And, you know, I'll take the Progressive Partnerships performance on this particular issue as well. And I mean, we also make mention in 2.3 about slippage as far as cost pressures and material shortages, as a result of Brexit, yeah, but also I think we shouldn't underestimate the effect that HS2 has had on materials, particularly in the West Midlands. Not only materials, but also labour shortages as well, because it has sucked out an enormous amount of resources, physical and material, from the whole of the delivery capability. 5.2 Treasury investments are currently 85 million against a planned level of 40. I'd be grateful to know what that is. And then in 6.10, 6.10, adult social care. Adult social care takes up 34% of our budget. We had a meeting last week with a very senior officer within UHB hospitals, and he said that at any one time there were 160 patients that could be out in the community, but couldn't go out into the community because there wasn't the capacity within the community to take them. And I'm taking that as far as facilities and beds within social care, but I'm also taking it, and I know this to be effect, adaptations within homes. And I think that it is our responsibility, particularly as far as the housing department is concerned, to ensure that we are able to react quickly to adaptation. So I think we need to be cognizant of that, and to work closer, because this was the undertaking that I gave, if I remember, Fiona, that we needed to work far closer with our health colleagues to speed up the discharges from hospital, where patients were able to either go into a home or go into domiciliary care in their own home. Energy costs, 614, page 614. I know I've been told in the past, but I've been to bed once or twice. So can I be reminded of what our current contract with energy is, whether it is time limited, because that would help, I think. And then on savings in 8.2, high risk savings are currently 11.5 million of the 42.8. And that obviously has got to be a concern, because I think all that we've saved so far from the high risk is, very quick maths, £800,000. So that's still an issue at month 4. So with one or two of those comments, I'd be grateful for any responses that can come. Thank you.
Yes. Steve, you've got your hand up. Do you want to come in?
Hi, thank you, Chair. Yes, apologies. I've just joined this meeting. I was diverted to another meeting, so I'm not hugely sure where we are on the agenda. So apologies for that. But just in reference to the energy costs scenarios, I know that there's an outstanding action for us to provide details of the energy spend. We've captured that information. And what I'm looking to do is just verify that information as soon as I can. Verify. I'll send a briefing note out to members of Resources Overview and Scrutiny.
Are we on a contract? That's all I was asking.
Yes, we are on contract. What I want to try and do, Councillor, is to identify the current spend and also forecast spend in relation to any uplift in relation to that. And as soon as I've done that, I'll look to get that briefing note circulated.
Yes, Steve, thank you for that. If we could have that circulated to all the committee members.
Indeed.
Do you want me to answer some of those questions, Chair?
Yes, please.
Yeah, so Councillor, thank you for those questions. I've made a note of, I think, all of them. So the capital, looking at the profiling, we do try and look at the capital profiling throughout the year, and we will continue to do that, but absolutely take on board what you've said, and we will continue to try and improve and hone in on that. Hear your point about Brexit in 2.3 and the HS2 impacting on material prices and labour shortages. We can make a reference to that in future. 5.2, where you talked about the 85 million and the 40 million around the Treasury investments. We've got Mohammed with us, who I'll pass over to him in a moment, and he can answer that question for us. With regard to adult social care and the 160 beds you referred to that could be in the community, I'll take that one back to the adult social care team and make sure they're aware of that, and just ask that they look into that further. I know they are working with health colleagues. Steve has answered the energy question already, and then I think the last question you asked was around the high risk savings in 8.2. They're high risk at the moment. It doesn't mean they won't be delivered by the year end, and they have actually. So at Q1 we had 12.3 million of high risk. We have brought that down in 1 month by 800,000, and we're continuing to bring that down. So I'd like to hope that the next report you see, there'll be less at high risk. We are continuing to really focus on those as we go through this year. And last year we delivered 91% of the savings that we had in the budget. So, you know, that is a good track record, which we will try and better this year. Thank you, Chair.
Louisa, I'll be failing in my duties.
Thank you, Chair.
On 5.2, Councillor, it's the term Treasury investment is slightly misnomer in the sense that, yes, we do invest the money, but the purpose isn't to invest it. That makes sense. It's part. Yeah, we try to keep afloat of £40 million or say liquidity of £40 million in our account that we can instantly access that. At all points in time, we would always have £40 million of ready cash that we can have. So there's always, and that's based on average salary bill and on average payments out. So we try and keep that.
That's your liquidity.
Yeah. £85 million is just a point in time, so that fluctuates up and down depending on when we've had receipts in and money out. So on the 30th of June we had, or on the 31st of July we had £85 million. We could have used that 45 million extra to repay debt or do something with, but we probably knew that in 2 days' time we'd need that money to go back out again. Okay. So on an average we do aim for £40 million, but on a particular day you may be 85 because there's not much to do with it in a day to repay debt.
So we put it on over.
So we put it into money market funds over, and that's all that 85 million is in. So the aim isn't to make money out of that or to invest it, it is just holding that money for cash flow. If we knew we had that 45 million for longer, we could repay debt or we could put it on a longer term.
Yeah, well, we'll come to that shortly.
Yeah.
Yes. Thank you for that, Lisa. Thank you for that, Mohammed. Before we move on, can I
just ask one question, Chair? On my phone back.
Yeah, can you hold that question for a second, Councillor? Because I want to bring an answer to your earlier question first. So if you can, Fiona.
Yeah, Steve, you've joined the meeting for the item 8 on the agenda. We're currently on item 6 at the moment, but earlier in the meeting, when the cabinet member was present and talking about her priorities, there was a question about on the cabinet member's report, bullet point 7, about matching pay parity in the procurement process. And it was mentioned that you might be able to provide some insight into that. It was a question from Councillor Marion Jenkins.
That's right.
And I think the question was, does that give an advantage to organisations that match local government pay scales, or is it sort of an advisory piece of information that's requested as part of the process? So would it actually affect, would that the pay that the organisation has pays its staff actually affect the procurement process?
I think, Steve, the question is, I think the early question is there a condition within our procurement process that companies or entities bidding for contracts must have pay parity with local government, or is there another condition about pay?
No. As far as I'm aware, there's no parity clause in our tendering process around parity with local authority pay. There is a clause around real living. We are a real living wage authority, and there's reference within our contracting arrangements around real living wage, but that is quite specific in regards to organisations who deliver services on behalf of council related premises and things like that. But I can again share you the actual details that we stipulate within our tender documents around living wage payments.
Yeah, if you can send that around.
I will do.
We reach the conclusion that this is just wrong, what's written in this.
Slightly looser wording. It should probably reflect real living wage, and that's only, as Steve said, on where we are asking companies to provide service on our behalf, so that they're providing service for us.
Yeah,
living wage is not what this says. This says pay parity with local government.
Yeah, I think maybe the wording, could be tighter.
Well, it raises the interesting question. I mean, like, for example, our senior officers are fantastically paid. So would it mean that a company tendering would have to pay its senior directors at the same rate we pay our finance director and our chief executive? So if our chief executive is on north of 200 grand a year, could a small company bid if its managing director was earning less than 200 grand a year? Because that's what that says. So I think we've agreed that's complete nonsense, really.
Steve, does that make sense? What Councillor Jenkins saying?
It makes sense, but what I would like to do is, if I can take that offline, Fiona, just so I'm completely sure about the point that is being made, because again, apologies, I've joined the meeting late. My understanding is real living wage applies as I stated, pay parity not, but I want to just make sure that I've not missed anything in context. So Fiona, if you and I could take that offline separately, and then I will provide a formal response to members at post meeting.
Okay. Councillor Jenkins, you had a supplementary question.
Yeah, I just wanted to check that you said that a 2.5% pay increase would lead to a £1,900 on average increase per employee. Do I calculate correctly, therefore, that the average pay per employee is 77,000? Because if you take 1925 divided by 0.025, it comes up with 77,000, which suggests the average is 77,000.
I was getting there too.
No, what I said was we put into the budget a 2.5% pay increase for all of our staff. What's being offered by the unions is a £1,925 per employee. So lower employees, that will be more than lower paid employees, that will be more than 2.5%. Higher employees, it will be a lesser percentage. So it's a blanket £1,925 increase for every single employee in the council, which would, if we calculated that through, would cost around £14 million.
I see. Yeah, it's not quite what the bullet point said, but I understand now what you said. So whoever you are, wherever you are on the pay scale, if the union demand was agreed, and hopefully it won't be, but if it was agreed, everyone would get an absolute amount of 1925.
Not to 0%.
That's correct.
Not to 0%.
Not 0%. That's right. You would get 1925 irrespective of what.
Yes.
Okay, that's interesting.
Thank you very much for that, Peter. Thank you for that. Can I bring in item long-term debt strategy? Mohammed Sajid, interim head of financial strategy.
Yeah, there's a long report which sets out quite a lot of detail, but then to aid understanding of this meeting, I'll set up a quick presentation. Yeah. This is more about actually what is our long-term debt and what are we doing about it and what is it. So I'm starting off with the context that why do we have debt? Because it's not having debt isn't in itself a bad thing. It's actually what we do about it. So there's two reasons why we borrow as a council and the powers we have. We borrow for capital expenditure. We don't need to fund capital expenditure borrowing, but it's one of the ways to fund capital expenditure. And we can also borrow to manage cash flow in the short term. So that is if we need to make a payment today, but our money isn't coming in until 2 days' time, we can borrow short term. So, but the short term is the short term, so we've got to repay that back within 2 days. And the last point is it's illegal to borrow for revenue items or day-to-day activities. So our budget has to be based on data expenditure has to be funded from a budget. Any borrowing is just short-term cash flow management. So basically, our long-term debt all relates to capital expenditure. Next slide, please. I wish we had a tap with pounds coming out of it, but we don't. But again, financing capital expenditure, borrowing is an accepted form of capital financing. The Prudential Code and legislation allow us to borrow for capital expenditure. And there's many reasons for that, why that's good. The revenue budget could never afford in any 1 year to, our annual budget, as we saw earlier, about £500 million. We haven't got £500 million of revenue from that in a year. So we have to borrow and use other finances. There's also matching the cost to the benefit. If we are creating a 40-year asset, then we should try and pay that over 40 years rather than 1 year, so that the cost of benefits are matched, and that gives us that generational equity as well, so that the generations who benefit from it do pay for it. We do have other capital sources of capital financing. We have grants from government, from developers, as we mentioned, Section 106 sales, donations. There are some kind of people who organise who donate assets to us or money. We can use capital receipts, and we can also still use revenue money. And there is a very small percentage of revenue that is being used for financing. A main one is through the HRA, where the rents are being used to fund the investment in that. So basically debt, and our strategy is that we use borrowing as a last resort. So we try and exhaust all the other ones. So we do have a hierarchy of financing. We try to obviously maximize our grants, then maximize receipts, and then revenue, and then borrowing, because borrowing does have a cost to it. So our debt is some of the past borrowing that's yet to be repaid. Just to give you an indication of our capital programme, so our financial plan was £1.2 billion to spend over the next 4 years, and 30% of that is borrowing, but 2/3 is self-financed. So if we do need to borrow, what we do ask is, does the project wash its own face? Does the project generate enough savings or efficiencies to repay that, or can the service then find the money within their own budgets to repay that, so that it's not a burden on the bottom line or onto the budget gap? So 2/3 of our borrowing in the current capital programme is self-financed. Remainder has fallen onto the corporate bottom line for us to fund corporately. And there may be a reason why we want to fund that corporate, because the services, it's maybe a corporate initiative. I mean, an example would be the rewiring of the council assets would be a corporate rather than a particular service pay for this. Council-wide would pay for this. So next slide, please. Just giving us some statistics. On the 31st of June, our external loan debt was just over £3 billion, which is the highest amount within the UK local government sector, but then we are the largest local authority. So looking a bit deeper into that, if we took the debt per head of population, that amounts to just over £2,500, and in 480 UK local authorities, that's 41st based on DLUG data. If we adjust it for our services, because not every local authority provides the same level or range of services that we provide. So just to give another indication of the complexity of the size of the organisation, which is a problem just simply the population, because there's other subcounties don't provide wage, subcounties don't provide HRA. So looking at what we do based on trying to get some parity, our data that Treasury advisors have given us is that we're 130 out of 480. And as we said previously, debt is a historic figure, so it's based on decisions that we made historically over the last 100 years or so. So it's not something that's going to be done in the last 2 or 3 years. So based on that, we are still slightly higher than than the average, but not the largest one when we talk about the debt per head or debt by service. Next slide. Okay, how we borrow. So once we've decided to borrow, we've got 2 ways of borrowing. Just to give context, we do internal borrowing, and that's simply where we have cash reserves at the moment. So when we've decided that on a particular project we need to borrow for that particular project, it doesn't mean we have to go straight to the market to borrow money. If we've got internal money within reserves or within our bank, we can use that money for the short term until we need to repay that money, or that needs to be used for the purposes it's set aside. And then we use that, and when we've exhausted our internal borrowing, then we do go externally. And the main sources of our external borrowing are the Public Works Loan Board, and we use that first if we can because it's quicker. We went to a private institution, there'd be a lot more vetting, a lot of paperwork, a lot of administration would take longer, whereas with PWB, we can get that money within 5 days and fill it out. Slightly more complicated form than it was a few years ago because they're looking at what we're doing and what the local government is borrowing for. We can go to the financial institutions, we can actually issue a public bond if we needed to. On the short-term side, we can go to other local authorities. With our bankers, we have an overdraft working capital facility to get some short-term money as well. So next slide. So there is a cost to this borrowing and this debt. Internal borrowing, there's no cost of money going out in that sense, but there is a lost investment income, which is quite low, so that's not been a cost, but there's opportunity cost as well. But the cost of investment income, losing investment income, that's going to be much lower than the cost of external borrowing, so which is why we exhaust that first. External borrowing has 2 costs on the revenue budget. The first is the interest cost that we need to pay in that particular year. The second is that by statute, we need to make a debt repayment each year or a minimum revenue provision, set money aside. So this is set by statute, and we need to make what is called a prudent provision. The government's given us guidance on what it recommends or what it thinks we can use as prudent, but we are free to choose whatever other method that we think and that we can satisfy auditors and the government that it is prudent. So one of the methods that the government recommends is that if you're borrowing for a 40-year asset, you should look to repay that debt over that 40 years so that try and match again the benefits of that asset with the repayment period for the asset. So if we were creating an asset that was only for 10 years, we couldn't try and repay that over 40 years because that wouldn't be seen as prudent. So there's 2 costs that hit the bottom line or hit the revenue budget on each year as a result of our borrowing, so the interest and the debt repayment. Next slide, please. Just to give an indication, this is from the financial plan. In 2023, we budgeted our net interest costs to be just under 129 million. And we're looking to repay debt or set money aside for debt repayment as part of the MRB of 108 million. That gives us about 226 million pounds net cost this year. It rises in the future years for 2 reasons. One, we're trying to put more money aside to pay off debt as a decision. And also the other charge is that £10 million credit is to do with the credit we're getting or the benefit we're getting of making the pension repayment earlier by 3 years. So this is that annual impact of the saving we made by paying the money up earlier. So we pay our 3-year contribution to the pension fund early. That gives us an interest saving. So that's the saving we've got on that money, which is why, and because we haven't yet agreed for the future 3 years, it's not in the figures yet. Once we agree that with the pension fund, that will then hopefully give us a similar credit in future years as well. So you can see there are the numbers that do hit. So there is a £226 million charge to the revenue budget this year and similarly in future years as a result of this borrowing costs and decisions. Next slide. So what are we doing actively to try and reduce these debt costs? Obviously, anything we can do to bring them down. The first point is that cost is one of the 3 treasury management risks that we are trying to manage. So cost isn't the be all and end all. We've got to make sure we've got liquidity. So we've got to make sure that there's enough money in our bank, or we have enough money to be able to do what we need to do, which is pay our day-to-day expenditure, but also to finance capital programs. So we need to make sure that any strategies we do, we've got ourselves the liquidity. We've also got to look at the market as well, and what's happening with the market. I'll come on to that later on. We could look to repay debt today, but the risk we run is that we may need to borrow again next year or the year after. And if we think interest rates are going to go up, we might end up in a situation where we're actually borrowing more expensive than if we'd have held on to that debt. So why redeem early when we might need to go to the market? So we try and balance, those risks off with the caps. But as I said, there's two elements of our debt. One is repayment of debt, one is the cost of debt. So in terms of repayment of debt, to bring our debt level down, we could reduce the capital program. That would be a policy decision. And obviously a lower program with lower borrowing requirements in it. The other element could be that we could reduce future borrowing. So keep the program the same, but reduce the amount of borrowing on that. And that could be by using more capital receipts or using grants, different. But we always try and do that. So try and reduce that. We could repay debt faster, which means that you'd have, use our capital receipts or have an increased MRP. The lower our debt level, I mean, there's less interest to pay on that debt in the future. So we've got a number of options to reduce our debt level. We could reduce our debt servicing costs, which is something we actively do in treasury management. So we try to aim for a balanced loan portfolio. So when we do go out to borrow, a 1 year borrowing is at a different rate to a 30-year borrowing or a 50-year borrowing. So they vary. So we try and then think about what's our split and our maturity profile. How much debt do we want maturing in the next 5 years? How much debt do we want maturing in 50 years, in 40 years? And we try and balance that off. So we try to have a consistent debt profile, but then also try and pick where we can, where it might be cost advantageous to us. Previously, the short-term debt was so low, the cost of short-term debt was very low. We're talking at sub 0.5%, whereas long-term debt was near 2%. So there was a strategy to try and maximise our short-term debt and variable rates. Now things are changing slightly, and as the volatility in the market, it's more like let's get some certainty and let's lock in some rates. So we've done that last week. We borrowed about £80 million for the next 12 months, so that we've locked in some rates given the volatility that was happening in the market, so to give ourselves a bit of certainty. We could look to reschedule or refinance debt. We are always looking and talking to especially our private bondholders. There's no value in doing that with PWLB because the penalties are so much that they're actually equivalent to the cost of paying the debt off over the life. But with private bondholders or with our private loans, we are actively talking to banks and institutions and individual bondholders about if we were to repay the debt earlier, what can we get to? What kind of agreement can we get to? And we're always looking at that. And we've got one on the table at the moment that we are trying to work the numbers out whether it's advantageous to us to do that or not. We can reduce our MRP while staying prudent. So we have that. You saw the figure about 120 million each year we use to repay debt from our revenue provision. We could review our MRP policy while staying prudent and try and reduce that. That would obviously mean we're paying off debt slower, so we have a higher interest rate going forward, but without reducing, it's kind of balancing that we're trying to do. So that was kind of the summary of the report and what we are trying to do. So we manage this on a daily basis and we try and keep on top of it, and we are, given the numbers involved, it's worthwhile for us to look at it all the time and try and explore avenues of making things better and bring costs down.
Thank you very much, Mohammed, for that. I'll open it up to the committee members. Any questions or comments?
Yeah.
Councillor Tilsley?
Yes. I looked through this particularly, and it's 10.1, which I specifically looked at, given the comments that you made, Mohammed. We've both been around a fair amount of time in finance, and I happen to remember what PW they were charging 20, 30 years ago when we were doing a whole range of new builds, particularly in the 70s and the 80s, and we've still just about got some of these loans on the book. and interest rates were very, very much higher then. And it's trying to get that profile right, isn't it? And we're still carrying 35, 36% of 20 to 40 year PWB loans on our books. And going back to the comments that you were making, trying to offset the debt with the premium that we've got to pay to get out of it. And it's always that balancing act. Having said all that, I mean, to boil it down to simple language, we are paying £130 in round figures interest every year. We actually take in council tax off the people of Birmingham £400 million. And that boils it down to me into biteable chunks that I'm sure that when you pay your 1,600 quid council tax, the thought of £400 of that going to interest would chill the vast majority of council tax payers. So it's really getting that balance right, and being able to close on a lot of those long-term debts to actually bring the interest rate that we pay down. And it is quite helpful. Earlier in the paper in paragraph 7.1, the fact that we are paying 4.18 on PWLB.
Yeah, we've got the highest paying is 9%. I think that's coming.
Yeah. Which is figures that shudder when I think about it. But that was still a good. Well, I'm going to say that was still a very, very good deal at the time.
I remember seeing a loan for 9.99 when I was 18. I thought, that's great news. That's significant.
So it's trying to get that balance right.
It is. We took a loan in February. We keep an eye on the market all day. I think it's on what it ticks over, and on our screen we saw PWB drop for some reason. Some comment must have been made down to 1.95, and we took a 30-year loan then.
Well, I was just about to say bite that.
Yeah, we did. Yeah, so we are in active and strategic work. So we know what we need, and we're always ready to pounce whenever we can. But the way the market's going up at the moment. So
well, that's my concern.
Yeah. Which is why last week we took about £80 million at an average of 3% for different events. So which was kind of good to this current market. So
that's locked in now.
Yeah, that's locked in now.
But this is my worry, that we're now living in an inflationary period with interest rates going up. And if we can pay out long-term debts and stop incurring new ones at the moment, obviously and pay off, it's going to be beneficial. But I know that the Treasury management team are on.
Yeah, we're having discussions, and we are.
But it's having this kind of discussion that is helpful to me, and I'm sure helpful.
Yeah, we're talking to peers, we're talking to the industry as well. We're trying to keep Treasury management as well. My mantra is keep it simple, because I think there's a famous saying in finance is that if it doesn't make sense, it doesn't make sense. That if you can't explain it, I think Councillor Jenkins said, if you can't explain it in a few words, then there's probably something wrong with it. So we try and keep it as vanilla as possible. But there's some new products that come on the market where you can actually forward lock rates now. So I could agree now to take a loan in 6 months' time, agree the rate today. So I can lock something in if you want to get some certainty. So we're exploring that at the moment. But we are looking at, the dilemma is, do we wait now for 6 months to see what happens to the market because it might drop? Or do we lock something in now and get that certainty? And I think the mood in the sector at the moment is to get some certainty to the budget. So that I don't come back here in the monitoring saying actually our interest costs are 3 million more than you budgeted for, because the market's moved against it. So we're trying to get some certainty. So that's what we're going to be doing in the next 2-3 months as we feed into the budget processes, hopefully
Well, the Fed is moving things at 75 points now, not 50.
Exactly. It used to be 25 basis points was the movement. Now they're moving at
50 and
75.
Thank you.
Chair, did you get the message? I need to leave at 1:45. I'm conscious that leaves two of you. But I think we're nearly finished.
We are nearly
Yeah,
finished.
we are. So if you have no further questions, Councillor Jenkins, we can.
I have to leave now, so I simply must get some of my 4:30.
Okay. Could I ask one question while you're here, please? And I did give Mohammed advance notice.
Yeah, take a note of that, please.
On property investments. There's two that's come up. One I've got no problem with, and you'll know about this, Councillor Jenkins, and that is the investment in the retail in Sutton, 15.6 million, and that is being used as obviously to regenerate Sutton Town Centre, which is of paramount importance. The other one that has crossed my interest is number 9 Colmore Road, which we bought for £26.4 million. Now I can't see any regeneration value in buying that, so I don't know whether you've got the answer to that, but it is capital, and I'm making a presumption that we've had to go into the market to purchase that. And it just gives me, what's happening in the business sector, in the Colmore Road bit, I would have thought that is all hunky-dory. There's no reason for the City Council to intervene, but I would seek some assurances on that.
There was a cabinet report that went to July to approve that acquisition.
Well, from my lowly point within the pecking order, I'm just questioning it.
I'll share the cabinet report, and then any subsequent questions can pick that up with
Okay,
the
thanks.
team and the rationale for doing that. But
Okay.
there was a regeneration case around the Snowden station and what was happening around the A30.
Oh,
Yeah.
okay, thank you.
Thank you for that, Hamid.
Thank you.
Moving on to the work programme. Oh yes, the plan.
Sorry, I have to depart.
That's okay.
I think the meeting can continue, but any decisions that we made or any view that the committee wants to come to would have to be approved at the next committee meeting. But looking at the agenda, I don't think there's any decisions to be made. So.
It's for information.
Yeah. Okay, thank you very much.
Okay.
Thank you.
Yeah.
Plan procurement activity report. Steve. Steve, are you still there?
I am indeed. Thank you, Chair. Yes, this is standard report to highlight the updates to the procurement activities. It was discussed and approved by Cabinet on Tuesday of this week, I believe it was, and all matters went through with approval. I would just further note that for members' awareness that this is these reports that have come forward are slightly different from what we previously presented and how we previously presented. We are now presenting plan procurement activity reports in 2 reports. One is for reports which are key decisions, and then those go on to the forward plan and are announced 28 days ahead of the cabinet meeting. And then there's the second planned procurement report, which are reports which are over the 177 services value but are not deemed as key decisions. So it's just sort of a slight nuance in regards to how members will have seen these reports coming forward to committee in previous times. But happy to take any questions on any of the particular matters that are presented in those reports.
Thank you for that, Steve. Councillor Chilsey, any comments, questions? No? No questions on that, Steve. Thank you for that concise presentation.
Thank you.
Moving on to the work programme. Can I bring Fiona in?
Yeah, certainly. So following discussions at last meeting and then subsequently discussions with officers and the chair, the work programme committee is attached as Appendix 1 to item 9. The progress report on the implementation of the procurement governance was due to come to this meeting, but that's now due to come to the October meeting. And the other item that has been planned into this work programme of this committee is the report on the implementation of the council-owned asset inquiry that has been undertaken by the Housing Naming Committee, but now falls under the remit of this committee. So the monitoring of those recommendations will come in November. I think those are the main changes to this report that's presented in the pack today. But I have noted the discussion earlier around the section 106 in SIL. So I'll work with Lisa to understand who the best people are to bring to that meeting, and I think probably discuss with you as the chair when that should come to the meeting. We can plan that in and report that back to the next committee meeting. And then the final thing I just wanted to update members on is at the last meeting there was a discussion during the finance report, the monitoring report around waste management, and members asked for the cabinet member to come to this committee. Having spoken to members of the scrutiny team, the cabinet member for environment has been to the Housing and Neighbours Committee and is probably going to go back to that committee at some point during the year. So rather than asking the cabinet member to come to 2 meetings to talk about the same issue, it's been suggested that when the cabinet member for environment goes to the Housing and Neighbours Committee, members of this committee will be invited for that item. Yeah. And I think that will join up the discussion that happened at the last meeting around looking at performance and finance. You know, if there are issues that members want to look at, joining that up rather than 2 committees looking at it in very separate ways.
I'll be joining.
Yeah. So that was my update on those the work programme. And you know, if there's any other items that come up under the final item on the agenda, the chair's authority to act, you know, I can discuss with you and bring up any other items forward as well.
Thank you for that, Fiona. Councillor Tilsley, any questions on that? We have got a date of the next meeting, 6th of October.
Should I have to work programme report?
Yeah.
6th of October, Thursday the 6th, that's correct.
Yeah, so, and then if there's any requests for calling, councillors calling or asking, we will consider any request. If received, other urgent business.
But no requests have been received for court actual petitions for this meeting, so it's nothing to consider at this meeting.
Right. And I move in an urgent situation between meetings, the chair jointly with the relevant chief officer has authority to act on behalf of the committee.
Agreed.
Councillor Tilsley.
I think formally that could be noticed.
Okay. I think, yeah.
I guess unless there's any less capital has any questions.
No.
On Appendix 3.
No. Okay. Right. I think we can close the meeting. Thank you very much for everybody. Lisa, Steve, Mohammed, Fiona. Who else was there?
Yeah, Amanda.
Thank you, Amanda. Thank you, Michelle. Thank you all. Thank you, Councillor Tilsley.
Thank you.
And I think that's